Okay, today we're going to take a look at the age of imperialism. We're going to look at the imperialist presidents. So we're looking at Roosevelt, we're looking at Taft, we're looking at Wilson. These are the same progressive era presidents that we looked at, but this time we're looking at them in the context of how they are expanding the United States. So from Roosevelt's time, from 1901 till the end of Wilson's presidency in 1921, we're looking at what these three guys did in terms of expansionism and imperialism. So let's start with Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt comes up with this plan in 1904 called the Roosevelt Corollary. The word corollary just means in addition to something. And in this case, the Roosevelt Corollary is an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. Now remember, the Monroe Doctrine is 1823. This is James Monroe's policy where he's basically telling Europe, you have to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. You can't come into Latin America. You can't come into South America. This is the United States little zone. This is our little sphere of influence. It's our own backyard. So Europe, you stay out. The problem with the Monroe Doctrine at the time was that we didn't really have the military to back up this doctrine. We were basically telling them to stay out, but we couldn't really force them. In 1904, Roosevelt's in the position where we are a massively industrialized state, we are a militarized state, and we actually have the Navy and the Army to basically back up this doctrine where we're telling Europe to stay out of our backyard. This puts the United States in a position sort of like the international police. We can basically now dictate who can do what in Latin America, who can participate economically, socially, politically. If we want to keep Europeans out, we can do so. If we want to go in and dictate what Latin American, South American governments are doing and dictate what sort of economic policies are going to be put in place to be beneficial to the U.S., we can do that now. We can sort of pretty much run the show in Latin America and in South America. Here's an example of some of Roosevelt's corollary put into action. Of course, we talked about the Platt Amendment. That is the addition in the Treaty of Paris, which ends the Spanish-American War. This basically makes Cuba a protectorate under the United States. So the U.S. can basically get involved militarily, economically, anytime they want. If they feel Cuba is threatened by Europe, or if some sort of policy doesn't go the way they like in Cuba, we can basically step in anytime we want. The U.S. also gets involved in Venezuela. We set up a naval blockade to prevent Germany, a European country, from basically entering into our sort of little sphere of influence. Here's another map. This is showing basically from Roosevelt's presidency through Taft, through Wilson, we see U.S. intervention politically and economically. Here we've got Cuba, protectorate. Panama is going to be a protectorate. Dominican Republic is going to be a protectorate. You can see here on each of these countries that there are multiple interventions in a lot of these countries. So it's not just 1 year we go in, do something. There's multiple times we're going in repeatedly to either kick out European forces or to basically dictate economic policies that will be favorable to us, or to basically dictate to these countries what their governments should be doing to be beneficial to the U.S. Speak softly and carry a big stick. This was sort of the famous saying of Teddy Roosevelt, and it kind of sums up the policy of the Roosevelt Corollary nicely. Essentially, we will use diplomacy, we will use our words to sort of get what we want, but if we have to, we will use this big stick. We will use essentially the military. We will use our Navy to enforce these policies. And in this political cartoon, it kind of sums it up nicely. This is Teddy Roosevelt, dressed as a police officer. He is wielding this baton, this big stick. On it, it says the new diplomacy, meaning it's not just about speaking and kind of asking and using diplomatic solutions. It's more about the military might that backs up your policies. So in this corner, you can see the Latin American natives, who are subjected to this big stick diplomacy. If they step out of line, we will certainly use it to keep them in check. And over here on the right-hand side, all these caricatures represent European nations. And this kind of represents, hey, we're going to keep you guys, Europe, you're going to stay out of our own backyard. Another political cartoon that kind of sums up the Roosevelt Corollary. Here's Teddy Roosevelt, there's the big stick, and what is he carrying behind him? This is a chain of U.S. naval gunships. And maybe it's hard to read, but it says the Caribbean Sea here. So he's basically saying, this is our little zone, and I'm going to protect it with the naval force. If I have to use the big stick, or if I have to use my naval forces, I certainly will. Another political cartoon. Here's Roosevelt in the upper right-hand corner. Down here, this represents the monarchies of Europe. And in the middle, we have the native of the Dominican Republic. And at the bottom here, it's kind of hard to read, but it says the Monroe Doctrine. And of course, the corollary, the addition to the Monroe Doctrine, is the military, the Navy that's backing it up. So now we can basically point our guns and not just a piece of paper at Europe to force them out. And in the middle is the poor Latin American countries. They're not militarized, they're not industrialized, they have no say in the matter. They're going to be imperialized by one or the other, either Europe, but now it's going to be the United States because we have the military backing it up. And again, here's just another map showing you the various U.S. involvement throughout Latin America, Central America, and South America. And like I said, multiple places, multiple times within those places, the Roosevelt corollary put into action. Okay, let's take a look at William Howard Taft. Taft's got a different approach. He's still going to use the Roosevelt corollary. He's still going to use that military aspect when need be, but his approach is going to be to use money. His approach is called dollar diplomacy. The plan is basically to invest into Latin American countries. We're going to go in, we're going to build roads, we're going to build railroads, we're going to build harbors, we're going to build schools, we're going to build hospitals, infrastructure, the things that any country, city needs to be able to do things on a daily basis. So these Latin American, South American countries are underdeveloped, and Taft feels that by investing and building those things for these Latin American countries, it'll help build relationships. That way, they'll be more likely to trade with us. The other part of this, aside from building the relation with those countries by giving them money, it's also going to work out good for U.S. economic and business interests. Building roads, railways, harbors, it's going to make it easier for those U.S. businesses to extract the raw materials and finished goods out of those countries. And that's ultimately the goal of imperialism, is to gain access to those resources and to make more money. So Taft's approach is kind of smart, makes sense. It's going to cost the U.S. a lot of money, but the idea was in the long run, we're going to make more money by investing some money. Yes, Taft, the story of him getting stuck in a bathtub. He broke up the porcelain trust, and they got back at him by creating this fictitious story of being stuck in a bathtub. Poor Taft. We'll watch this video in class sometime. We'll watch this one as well. Let's move on to President Woodrow Wilson. Wilson's president in 1913 to 1921. His approach is kind of like he wants to back away from the aggressive approach of Roosevelt. He wants to sort of back away from the dollar diplomacy approach. He wants to promote this plan called moral diplomacy. His plan is to basically to try and convince Latin American, South American nations that if you guys get on board with democracy and capitalism, the things that we use in the United States, you'll be better off. I mean, look how strong and powerful and industrialized and wealthy the United States is. You guys can be like that too if you just follow the same economic and political programs that we're doing in the United States. The other goal was it's easier to do business with people and countries that have the same economic system, that have the same political views as you. So he's trying to build relations and build compatible economic and political interest with these foreign countries by promoting democracy, promoting capitalism. He's still going to use the military approach. He's still going to use a little bit of investment, but he's hoping to back off of those through this moral approach. Right? We're going to be friends. We're going to be nice to each other, hence the moral diplomacy name. So on paper, it sounds great, right? Okay, we won't have to use a military, we won't have to invest so much money, but in reality, Wilson is the president who actually sends in more troops abroad than both Taft and Roosevelt combined. So, whoops. Mexico in 1914, Haiti 1915, Dominican Republic 1916, and then eventually he's going to get us involved in World War I, which we'll talk about in more detail. But basically, World War I is a war where one of the major long-term causes is all these decades of imperialism amongst all these industrial countries. And there's other examples where where Wilson is sending in a lot of troops to different Latin American and South American countries. So good on paper, moral diplomacy, building economic, political relations, but in reality, not so much. He's actually sending in more troops. We'll watch this video in class too. How appropriate, Woodrow Wilson, the bloody handprint on the volleyball, the guy that sends in more troops. So just to recap, 3 presidents, 3 imperial plans. Theodore Roosevelt adding to the Monroe Doctrine with the Roosevelt Corollary. That is the big stick diplomacy. We'll use the military if we need to. Get on board or get hit with the big stick. William Howard Taft is dollar diplomacy. Let's invest in Latin American countries. That'll help build relations, and in the long run, it'll be more beneficial for U.S. businesses. And then Woodrow Wilson with moral diplomacy. Let's be friends. Let's be kind. Democracy, capitalism. Yay. Not so much. But that's the basic gist of the 3 presidents and their 3 plans. That's the end of it.